Your Majesty, Excellencies, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the session on rebuilding education for the 21st century. I'm Riz Khan, I'll be moderating the session, but it's very much something for you, the participants, so we hope very much to get you taking part in this. Believe me, education is basically very much an important topic, of course, and we'll be discussing why, which many of you know, but we'll be discussing why during the next hour or so. I was wondering who I'd upset, or maybe we'd all upset, having to come here at 9 o'clock, first session after the Google party. We're still seeing people on the streets walking out of it, so it's a little worrying. I'll try and talk quietly for those of you who haven't recovered from it. One thing we do want to do is examine a number of issues here, and I'm going to just outline those. If you've read the agenda for the session, you'll have seen some of the key issues we want to touch on. We want to look at what's been achieved in terms of progress so far for the Education for All program, and what are the remaining challenges, what do they signal. We need to look at education and consider why it's important at a global level. Why should it be an issue that we look at as a global challenge for us? And what actions needed from every stakeholder, the governments, the NGOs, and of course individuals as well. I have a wonderful panel here, of course, to discuss this, and a diverse range of views, or at least diverse range of angles from which to look at this session. Her Majesty Queen Rania Abdullah, the Queen of the Hashemite Kingdom of Jordan, is with us. She's a member of the Foundation Board of the World Economic Forum. We have Mr. John Chambers, Chairman and CEO of Cisco, who's joining us. Irina Bokova, the Director General of UNESCO, the United Nations Educational, Scientific and Cultural Organization. Mr. Trevor Manuel is the Minister of National Planning Commission from South Africa, is joining us. And Harold McGraw III, Terry McGraw, is Chairman and President and CEO of the McGraw-Hill companies. One thing I always think about is how much things have changed since I was a lad. And some of you will have heard me tell the story of a teacher who had some very young kids who had come in after an afternoon break. And the teacher said, now you've come back from your break, we're going to look at spelling. I want to do some spelling. And she picked on one little lad and said, Michael, what did you do during the break? He said, well, miss, I played in the sandbox with Catherine. She said, well, Michael, if you can spell sand, and you can get it correct, you can have a cookie. So Michael confidently says, S-A-N-D, miss. She goes, very good, Michael, you get a cookie. So Catherine, you were in the sandbox with Michael. Yes, miss, we built sandcastles, it was great fun. Well, if you can spell box, Catherine, and I warn you, it's a little tricky, think about it. If you can spell box, you can have a cookie. So she's very nervous and says, B-O-X, miss? Very good, Catherine, you get a cookie. Mohammed, did you play in the sandbox with Catherine and Michael? He says, no, miss, I wanted to, but they threw sand at me, they kept me out, they wouldn't let me play in there. She said, Mohammed, that's blatant racial discrimination. If you can spell blatant racial discrimination. Now, fortunately, I know it's bad. Fortunately, times have changed a lot, and though we still have a long way to go, and we want to, of course, put education very high on the agenda to make sure that progress is made at the kind of rate we need to kind of achieve the goals that have been set. As I say, I'm very honored to have a distinguished panel. I'm going to kick off with a question to each person because it's very much a non-speech environment. It's very much active and participant. So I'll start, Your Majesty, if I may, just by asking you, we look at one of the key questions we have here for this session, and that is why should we look at education systems as of global importance?
So, as a global family, we came together 10 years ago in the year 2000, and we said that we would make education for all a reality by 2015. That was part of the Millennium Development Goals. And we said that no country that's committed to achievement in education should be thwarted by lack of resources. Now, the way it looks now is that we have 50 million more children into schools, but we still have 72 million children out of school. It would cost us $16 billion to get all of those children in developing countries into primary education. So far, we've only raised $3 billion. Now, when you think of $16 billion, it might sound like a lot, but if I put it into perspective, it is what the U.S. just committed to retraining and rearming the Afghan military and armed forces. It is half of what the United States consumers spent on online shopping just in the last holiday season. So it's very much within our reach. But it's the priority issue. It's the sense of urgency. Now, if we were to look at all these scourges facing our world, all the intractable problems from poverty, hunger, disease, terrorism, climate change, all of these problems can be relieved, if not totally solved, through education. The thing I find frustrating is that it's very easy to get everyone to agree that education is important and it's a priority. But it's difficult to get them to realize that it's an urgent issue. And that's why politicians, when they're lobbying and when they're campaigning, they'll always raise the education issue. But once they get elected, it seems to go down their priority list, partly because the rewards from education take a long time to reap, and it might not fit within the political cycle. So the sense of urgency starts to go down. So it's really trying to say that actually the lack of education is an unfolding crisis. It is an emergency. We've seen how economies have been able to move mountains of money to shore up their economies and only move molehills for education, and that needs to change.
Now, of course, building awareness is crucial, but what's to stop everyone coming together in a session like this and saying, okay, we talked about education, great, go away and forget it. As you say, it drops down the list of priorities. So is the first step strengthening that awareness, making it very integral in everyone's priorities, or is it getting the resources?
Well, once you raise the awareness and move it up the global agenda, then it becomes easier to raise the resources because the resources are available. It's just making people realize that it is important. It is a matter of life and death. 7 million cases of HIV/AIDS can be prevented in the next decade if we achieve our education for all goal. A child is 50% more likely to make it past his 5th birthday if he's born to an educated mother. So it is an emergency. But I think we live in a culture of instant gratification where we want quick fixes. And education is really not a quick fix. It's a long-term solution, but it's one that's sustainable, it's one that lasts, and one that really works. So we just have to do the hard work of doing it right, even if that investment the returns on that investment take some time.
So it's investing in the future. Now, John Chambers, having learned what Cisco can do, I'm a big fan. It's amazing what your company is up to. Where does that amazing technology and innovation that you're creating and being very much a part of, where does that fit into this?
When you try to do something that no one's ever done before, unless you do it differently, you'll get the same results. And so I think the points that Her Majesty raised in terms of the numbers, they're actually, while we made improvement, they're scary. The number of teachers we need, raising the awareness. But innovation is a way of capturing ideas from a whole group of creations. And this is how we do our products now. So you get a lot of ideas, you pick the best ideas, and there has to be a selection process based upon the vision you want to end up with. And that's why I think defining the vision of what our definition of success is. My definition of success, 3 billion people making less than $3 a day. No one's in that category in a given point in time. Standard of living increases, etc. Then you've got to select which ones you go with and get an unusual combination of people that traditionally have not worked together to work toward this goal. Government leaders, NGOs, academics, business leaders. And in yesterday's session where we had 60 of us together, at first we were almost talking different languages. And then within a short time we realized the power that we could do together. And then you've got to realign resources. And as you realign resources, you have to retrain them toward the goal. And then you've got to set very specific goals and make sure the accountability is there. That's true in developing new products at a high-tech company. I think it's true in fixing this problem. I do think it's manageable.
In a nutshell, you had some very high-powered people you met with on this issue yesterday. What came out of that? What do you think was the core element of that?
Well, what was fascinating is you put 60 people with this type of background in a group and talk about it. This is really what the World Economic Forum is about. It's getting people together that have a different background like Terry, Irina, and you think about how we provide our expertise, educate each other, come to agreement on what the problem is, come to agreement on what the definition of success is, then say, how do we innovate together? And then how do you take the strengths of each other and combine it in terms of a vision to make it happen? There were 18 CEOs in that session. I've never seen it ever before in double digits. We've been doing it, Your Majesty, for a number of years. And 14 of them agreed to say, like Terry, we're going to be with you for the long run. So I think it's now outlining a vision, not just stating the costs, not just stating the problem, but a vision of success. And once you get that vision of success, you can get people to play together toward that goal.
Thank you. Irina Bokova, good to have you with us too. Now, one thing that was interesting we were chatting with before we came up onto the stage was the issue of numbers. A lot is talked about when it comes to numbers of kids in schools. What about balancing the numbers with the quality of education? Not just quantity of education, but quality. How important is it to make sure the quality is of the right level?
I think this is a very pertinent question. We just launched the Global Monitoring Report on Education this year, which is commissioned by UNESCO, made by an independent team. And all these figures that Her Majesty mentioned and some others well known about high level of illiteracy still in the world, about the dropouts of girls, the necessity to focus on women's and girls' education, about the marginalization because of different reasons, because of that children come from poor families or represent minority groups, or they are girls and they're not sent to school. But I think that the agenda on education is enlarging, and we see more focus on quality of education. And I think this is extremely important because we talk about the quality of teachers. We can't get good education. We can't improve numbers even if we don't have qualified teachers. We can't have qualified teachers if we don't enlarge the agenda of education, if we don't include secondary education and higher education, if we don't include science in education. We have a lot of demand from African countries, for example, to help them include science in their programs. We can't talk about quality education if we don't talk about technical and vocational training. And we can't talk about quality education if we don't talk about education for sustainable development. So the agenda of education is included. But if I come back to the first very excellent advocacy that Her Majesty mentioned about education being a political commitment, I think that nowadays it's extremely important. And what is also important is that business leaders come into the debate with a very strong voice. And yesterday I could send that usually I'm accustomed to sit with ministers, with government officials into meetings. And yesterday there were business leaders. And we spoke almost with one voice that education should be put on the agenda of G20 as soon as possible. The sooner we do it, the better results will come out tomorrow with development, Millennium Development Goals, with the getting out of the crisis, with innovation, with technology. I think this is an extremely important message that should come out of Davos this year.
Interesting you raised that. As I get to Trevor Manuel from South Africa, give me an example of where political commitment has been made in South Africa to serve the people there. Of course, you have a very diverse nation of people, the Rainbow Nation. How have you made that commitment, and basically, what are your priorities in that?
Well, thanks, Riz. I'm one of the breed of politicians that Her Majesty warned you against. Education is our largest priority. It's been that since President Mandela first took responsibility for governing the country, and President Zuma has joined in with Her Majesty's program on education for all. It's fundamentally important that we focus on this, but in dealing with it, I think that we're understanding that within education, the outcomes are too often determined intergenerationally. So the children of more affluent parents who are better empowered, who send their children to better schools, actually have a better chance. And for the poor, there's a lottery. So in dealing with education, it's not the big policy issues. We've lived through a number of changes, including an endeavor at outcomes-based education. The key issue is that there are probably between 400 and 500 million teachers in the world. And the focus is not so much on the system as it ought to be on the teachers, because they manage classes of between 30 and sometimes 80 children every single day, all day. And if you get that wrong, you then impair the future. And so I think that the focus, our understanding is clearly that the focus needs to be what happens in the classroom management, school management, ensuring the adequate distribution of learner support materials, and also ensuring that there are regular upgrades of teacher skills. At secondary school recently, a test was done in South Africa, and 37% of teachers passed the test that had been set uniformly. And if you fail at that, clearly your education system will fail. Now, the big problem in an audience like this is that it is at one level a money problem. We've got to get access, and so The issues about access for all are fundamentally important. That is the sine qua non. We can't do without that. But having done that, we then must empower parents in the local environment, because if you don't have the oversight locally, we fail. And this is why it's not so much money. I mean, you know, I was finance minister for long enough. We're one of the middle-income countries that funds education at the highest level, but we're not getting the outcomes. It's about the local empowerment, and I'm hoping that that's what we can talk about this morning.
Yeah, thank you. We'll look at some more examples from South Africa, but as we look at the developing world as well, Terry McGraw, one of the issues, your company has its fingers across the world, you know, very, very entrenched, and you know the markets across the world. When you have countries such as India and China, populations are booming, you know, the young population is growing as well. What results have you seen from your efforts at doing, connecting with those people, distance learning, for example?
Well, thank you. It is, as you said in the very beginning, what education was when you were growing up and what it is today has come a long ways, but the time frame has just narrowed so dramatically. Digitization is the opportunity of the century. And it is going to open doors and open paths to opportunities for so many people. When you talk about developing markets like China, there is a huge gap between what people learn in schools, the traditional system, and the skills, on the other hand, that they need to be able to get a job and to be able to be productive on that one. And where we focus is right there. You know, we were talking a little bit about the vocational and the professional aspect of it. We're working with a company called Ambo Education in China, which is working on developing specific skills to get into the business process outsourcing area. And these are not 4-year programs. These are not 2-year programs. These are 10-week programs and 20-week programs where we can develop specific skills that is going to allow you now to enter the work world. And workforce development and building the workforce of this century is what it's really all about. We're doing the same thing in India. We're working with Tata in a joint venture that we've had actually since 1970. We haven't done a lot with it. We've made some progress and whatever. In the last 2 years, the progress has been exponential. And again, it's in the vocational and professional area where we can give you the skill sets specifically through these online learning platforms that are going to allow you to get that particular job. So building the workforce is what it's about.
Thank you. I'm going to open it up for those of you who want to take part with your questions. Please do put up your hands and we'll get microphones to you. Put them up clearly so we can see them. You're a little in silhouette here. And I'll make sure that we get you in the order the hands go up. Please let us know where you're from, your affiliation and your name, please, so we can at least get involved there. We've got the microphones there. The lady just there, if you could, and then the gentleman, sir, put your hand up again. There, and I'll come to you in a moment, sir. The second row, sorry. Third row. There we go. Ma'am, you're first.
Good morning. My name is Roberta Bowman. I work for Duke Energy. Thank you all for your contributions this morning. The issues that we face today really span boundaries. At a session earlier, we heard, well, if only the designers would talk to the engineers, we'd make great progress with sustainable design. We heard from the medical community, if the doctors and the engineers and the manufacturers would talk together, we'd make huge progress in medicine and health and wellness. The concept of quality education really does require some redesign. I applaud the motivation around access and what happens in the classroom, but fundamentally, teaching people to think for the 21st century is the role of education. Just interested in your comments on where we go there. Thank you.
John Chambers, please.
When you look at something that hasn't been resolved before, what you're seeing is what are you going to do differently? First, getting governments aware, getting the money behind it, the political will to change, then movement to what I think public-private partnerships are going to be about, groups that have not worked together. Queen, Your Majesty, very much like you did in the Jordan Education Initiative, very much like we did in the network academies around the world, 3.2 million students educated with the UN, with NGOs, with Cisco, and ways to get jobs. What is different this time is groups are beginning to learn how to work together with a process, collaboration, and this is where the young people really understand it, and it's probably an area we've not put the time into. They understand gaming, they understand networking, they understand social networking capabilities, they understand collaboration. And if we'd build more of our education around how the young people train themselves and how do we create the environment for it with public-private partnerships, I think that's a large part of the answer.
If I can just add to
Please.
that. I totally agree that we need to get our global education house in order, because right now the efforts are really fragmented, and we are just approaching it as business as usual. You know, the same methods, traditional approaches, same players, and trying to achieve different results. That's not going to happen. So we need a different approach, more entrepreneurial, bold, creative, having non-traditional partners. For example, the health sector came together many years back and tried to increase their efficiency by starting an overall body called Gavi, and that has achieved incredible results. We need that kind of umbrella for the education sector. We need to think of what we thought were traditional players in a different way. For example, China, India. We can't just think of them now and Brazil, we can't just think of them as recipients of aid, but as partners in development. Cross-fertilization of knowledge in the developing world. So it's South-South learning, not just North-South learning. So a lot of these issues, creative ways in terms of raising funds, we need to break from traditional molds. So for example, issuing education bonds on the capital markets, focusing on standards, not just statistics, and ways to measure the standards. It's not enough to just increase enrollment and to say that we've closed the gender gap. What kind of education are those kids getting? Are they getting the skills that they need when they graduate to get them good jobs? So it really needs a whole new thinking and different players, new approaches to bring to bear to this sector.
And it's heartbreaking, Your Majesty, as you mentioned at the beginning, when you see how much in terms of resources are devoted to defence, that money channeled into education might produce some of those results that you refer to. So thank you for your patience, the Secretary. I'll come to you in just a moment.
Rajendra Pawar from NIIT in India. Have been involved in the Global Education Initiative. I think we've done tremendous amount of progress in creating new ideas of how things can be done by involving many players. But I think if I take the story analogy of your sandbox, it seems to me we've taken this existing system of how government runs education as the boundaries of the sandbox and worked within the sandbox. And the point I want to make and get a response is, I think the boundaries are the problem. And one specific issue which, when I heard Manuel talk about, accountability. The problem is that the government system of education, the money flows from the government all the way down to the teacher. And therefore, for the teacher, only that alignment makes sense. Everything else is a pain. So they don't come to teach. They don't care about the kids. So unless we can change that equation, all the good stuff we do in the sandbox will leave us very dissatisfied. For example, we need to transfer accountability and control of the village school payment to the teachers in the hands of either of the local government or a parent community. We see that in the best of schools where our kids go. We have a huge say in how things are done in the school. In the government system, it just goes upwards. So unless we change that, and it seems to me if we change that alone, we can get at least double the productivity without spending a penny more. I want to understand what the views are of the matter.
Certainly, thank you. Trevor, Manuel, I'll get you to answer that first, please.
You know, at face value, I agree entirely with what Rajan is saying. The problem, however, is that where teachers are more educated than parents, the power differential doesn't work. We have in legislation the requirement that every school has a school governing body. And that works pretty well, where parents are people like ourselves. We go to meetings, we oversee, we need to know that teachers are in the class teaching. The most recent study done in South Africa suggests that between schools in more affluent areas where there's contact teaching time of about 7 hours a day, and in poorer communities in the rural areas where contact teaching time is half of that, parents feel disempowered. And that is why I'm saying that in agreeing with you that one must empower local communities to have stronger oversight, we need to then be able to ensure that parents feel empowered and can maintain that oversight against people who are better educated and more powerful than what they are in society. I think that the other issue as well, for instance, is that with IT, you know, we have a situation where, in many respects, the IT divide is exactly the same. IT works well where parents are more interested, and works less well where it's an alien concept. Now, these are the bridges we must build, because it's less easy than just looking at this as a money problem. It's an unbelievably complex issue, and from what I've read, it's a similar problem in countries as diverse as the UK, the United States, India. It's a universally difficult issue, and this is what we must apply our minds.
I would just like a comment from Irina Bokova here on how perhaps UNESCO has had to also change the way it approaches its work across the world, taking into account some of the things that have been mentioned here, being able to create more local empowerment, being able to make sure the resources flow to the right areas, and working to update programs, education programs.
I would like to say that in this debate, one of our probably underlying principles is that one size doesn't fit all, because in terms of education, we have entirely different situations in different regions of the world. And we were talking here about middle-income countries. And there, of course, one of the main idea and objective that we have is to make more inclusive societies, to reach out to the marginalized. And the last report was exactly about that even countries which have huge also internal resources, they have to make such systems that marginalized groups are also included. Now, I think that in there, probably the question of quality and of teachers plays a huge role. I think that if you look at ICTs, and we are very much cooperating, I hope yesterday we clarified all the different aspects of the private-public partnerships that we have with the companies represented here and some others in terms of educating and training of teachers, which should be an ongoing activity. And then, of course, in introducing also to the classroom, the big question here is certification of teachers. We see in many parts of the world, teachers, 50% of the teachers do not have the certificate given by government or by any other organization in order to teach. They're not qualified to do that. And we're trying to put programs. We have launched the Global Teachers Initiative last year, and we are trying to put a specific emphasis on teachers. No ICT can substitute a good teacher. At the same time, no qualified teacher can introduce also good teaching without ICTs. So it goes hand in hand, and we are promoting exactly this kind of partnership.
Thank you. I'll get you in the order they came. Gentlemen here, please. Go ahead, sir.
Kamenov, Bulgarian Cardiac Institute. In my organization, we have one of the first private university hospitals in Europe, which is quite rare. We teach students in advanced cardiology. So the new Director General perhaps would give us a little bit of guidance about everywhere you turn today, you see invigorating of private-public partnerships. The main problem actually in this area is, even though the success of Gavi is recognized widely, is improving access of private educational providers. I know John Chambers for many years. I don't ask him, I ask the new Director General of UNESCO. Improving access of private educational providers to public funds. What UNESCO would do in this? Please, how are you going to educate us all, and particularly how are you going to educate the governments out of the crisis? Thank you.
Response.
Well, we are, as an intergovernmental organization, we are enlarging, as I said, the partners. In fact, I'm a new Director General. For the last 2 months, I have just established a task force on exactly on the partnership with the private sector, and I think mainly, we do have partnership also in cultural activities, in science, but we are mainly focusing on education based on the good experience we have with Cisco, with Intel, with Microsoft. As I said, we are very much introducing new ICT technologies, and it helps a lot. But I believe that the responsibility of governments should not be underestimated. And enlarging partners for education doesn't mean that we shift responsibility from governments. I think this is extremely important to be kept.
You know, just to get a little bit of debate going, one of the things we talked about in innovation was trying different things. And I think it's very important as we move forward on this debate that we not only view it as a multiple variable equation, we've got to solve all the variables, but we got to try different approaches. And I found that very often when we come up through a system, asking the people who came up through the system to fix it may not come up with the most innovative ideas. So I would argue it needs to be a combination of the two. Government needs to be heavily involved and committed, but we ought to try some new radical approaches in the process. And we've got to have the courage to take risk and not punish failure, and then pick a couple of the risks that work and then scale them very quickly.
A quick comment actually from Terry McGraw on this. In terms of your work, you deal with professional and vocational training. And I wonder, when it comes to innovating and changing what's needed and dealing with the demands on you, how much flexibility do you have to be able to move with the times?
Well, you have quite a lot of flexibility. I mean, I think that, everybody comes with a different set of conditions. Every country comes with a different set of conditions. It's not so much the resources, it's the involvement, the awareness, the access to a broader understanding. Your comments about, getting a better focus from a G20 or something like that starts to bring all of this together. Again, I come back. The digitization aspect, opens the door of opportunity like never before. And so, whether we're talking about a specific professional area where we can get after vocational training and targeted aspects to it, or we're talking about primary, education. It is really all about being able to get after, and I think the question about the critical thinking skills is the common standard that we've got to implore. It's not the one-way route, that I'm going to teach you this and you're going to have to learn this and you memorize this. It's the ability to think. And the instructional materials and a lot of the things that we're doing are starting to come up with this capability of, hey, whoa, you have to know these certain skills and capabilities, but you need to be able to think through the process. And so the instructional materials and again, the digital aspect of it, is really helping, to make more people think through the problem.
Mr. Ocampo, I'm going to ask you, actually, Rick Levin was next, please. Good to have you here, sir.
Rick Levin, president of Yale University. I think there's some obvious connections between what Mrs. Bokova, Mr. Manuel, Queen Rania are saying on the one hand and what Terry McGraw and John Chambers are saying on the other. And that is, Terry McGraw talked about digitization as a means of vocational education, and Mrs. Bokova, Mr. Manuel, Queen Rania stressing the importance of properly certifying and educating teachers and making sure that teachers have the adequate skills to do their work. So I wonder what Terry McGraw and John Chambers might have to say about how we can use this digital technology in an innovative way to educate teachers around the world. What are you thinking about that?
John, perhaps first, I go to you.
I think teachers give their lives for the students, and so I think we've got to do a better job of educating the teachers, and I think the way you have to do it is through broadband. The exciting thing is almost every country in the world is now putting out broadband, so you can suddenly change it. Second is you've got to do it through video. Video and collaboration skills are the future, and we found that if you give teachers the tools and give them the education, they'll pass it through. So I think actually the solutions are there, and it goes back to what we all are alluding to. It's a human network with different backgrounds that pull it together.
Are you noticing that technology is more widely available? Because there's always this question of who has access to it, who has the ability to connect to this?
Well, I think that's important because when we ask the G20 to support us, or you ask CEOs, they're going to say what's different. I've just come through 6 countries in the last week. You are seeing the build-out of broadband in every major country, and you're seeing the commitment from UN and other groups to say where countries can't afford it, we're going to find a way to make it happen. So I think that tipping point is in front of us, and I think the political way is in front of us. The key is, can we show the leaders our vision of how we do it together?
Okay, I was going to go to Terry first and get a comment on that digitization of learning and how it might help teachers, and then, Irina, if I could come to you.
Just to follow on what John said, because it's exactly what me and Mr. Hamadoun Touré, the Director General of the International Telecommunications Union, were doing yesterday. We were sitting together and we were putting up a new initiative. I mean, it's a little bit preliminary to mention it, but once we are on this topic about the broadband in education, so we will try to put such an initiative to combine forces ITU, private sector, and us with what we think as a priority in the content. Probably we will start with African countries. We have a couple of interests also, and it's important. Then something also on the digitalization. We have an extremely interesting project, very successful, that we started with the Library of Congress of the United States on the digital libraries. So it's an open sources. It's one of the most successful projects we have, 33 libraries, and we have another 30 who are interested in that.
Wonderful. Terry, sorry, go.
Well, I'm probably going to get in a little trouble here. When we start talking about teachers and teaching, we put way too much pressure on teachers. Everybody's got to be an Aristotle, and everybody's got to be able to invent and create in the classroom, and they're not supported well enough. And so a lot of the NGOs that are very successful, and I'm thinking stateside of the National Academy Foundation, the Harlem Village Academies, all of these kind of efforts, Teach for America, they all put this onus on a teacher, and we're going to find a very bright person and allow them to create in the classroom and all those kind of things. Well, you're not going to be able to replicate that. And therefore, what we need to do in supporting teachers is to be able to allow them to have the capability to navigate. Now, if you are, dependent again upon your conditions and what country and where you are in all this, the awareness level is where you have to go. You got to get up. You got to get out of your 1,000-foot level, and you got to get up to a 50,000-foot level and see what other people are doing and how they're creating and how they're doing that. But we need to help teachers to be able to navigate a classroom. And the way to do it is now through a lot of the digitization that we've been talking about. For us, we produce, a pupil edition, if you're talking just print now, a pupil edition, and we produce a teacher edition. What we're doing and what we're pushing for aggressively is to getting a very digital teacher edition that allows for a very open and far more friendly way of helping a teacher be able to master the subject that they're teaching and to be able to go that way. And we'll push and continue on that part.
I just want to say that, quality education is a sum of many components that are all essential. A good curriculum, great infrastructure, technology. But I do feel that the one element that can switch all of these things on is a quality teacher. Without a great teacher, with all the smart boards in the world, all the computers in the classrooms may become irrelevant and redundant. And without getting too technical, let's look at some examples that have actually worked. Finland is one of the countries that arguably has one of the best educational systems in the world. And when they tried to look at the secret of Finland's success, they found that they have the best teachers. So immediately you'd assume that they must be paying them extremely high salaries, and that's why they're so great. But they found that their salaries are average compared to other teachers in Europe. The one thing that's different is that the teaching profession is very competitive. Only 1 out of 10 people who want to enter actually get accepted. In other words, only the best teachers will do for the children in Finland. And what this has done is made this profession very prestigious, very competitive, very respected. The teachers are professionally invested in the running of the schools. The parents are socially invested in the teachers. So the teacher feels that he has ownership in the school and he feels respected by society. And that's one thing that I feel that we need to bring back is over the last few decades, the profession has lost some of its prestige. I remember with my grandfather, he was a teacher and people just look up to the teachers, the doctor and the teacher that everybody turns to solve their problems. So bringing back the prestige, the respect, ensures that we bring back the quality that we need in the classroom. And I think that has the major effect on our students. I'm sure every single one of you in this audience remembers a teacher that either inspired you or that turned you off a subject,
So it's treating it like a profession as opposed to just a job. And actually, I was very blessed with teachers. I go skiing. I'm still in touch with many of my high school teachers. I go skiing with one of my teachers, my biology teacher, every year. And he used to always say to me, I'm not here to teach you biology. I'm here to teach you how to learn biology. Exactly. But then again, when he didn't know an answer, he used to just say, I'm not an oracle, which I thought was a cop-out. But Mr. Ocampo, thank you for your patience.
Yes, I'm Luis Moreno Ocampo, the Chief Prosecutor of the International Criminal Court. I have a question for all the panel, and it's about how to use education to prevent violence. That's my problem. My duty is to prosecute people, but then the prevention is for the states, and they had to prevent using education, I guess. And Queen Rania is insisting in this idea, new methods. And Queen Rania and Mr. Manuel are talking about teachers. And Mr. Manuel also talk about local communities. And then Mr. Chambers and Mr. McGraw are talking about digitalization, modern systems. And she said, the Queen said, how to combine North-South problems, North-South solutions. And that's my question for the panel. How to help the teachers on the ground, the local communities that Mr. Manuel talked, with your tools, and maybe cannot reach your tools. How you can work with them? How to combine these two worlds?
Trevor, Manuel, first-hand experience from South Africa. How do you combine the world of digital access and advancement in innovation technology with the local roots in the community?
Okay, let me stir up some trouble here this morning. Anecdotally, teachers are scared of IT. Because if you take a 30-year-old teacher and put them in the class with 7-year-olds, give them each a computer, in 10 minutes, the 7-year-olds are going to be all over the computer, and the teacher can only go as fast as they've learnt. So there's a great fear. There's a great fear in applications, and so the investment in the teacher actually needs to take account of that. The second issue, which I think is somewhat understated, is the value of reading in feeding the imagination for cognitive development. I think too few people read, and reading is too small a part of our education systems everywhere. So that's a plug for one part of the McGraw-Hill business. And I'm not against you, John. No, we need to bring in the IT.
Whatever he loads, my networks carry. So.
Okay. I think the other issue is getting incentive systems right. Again, wealthier parents can afford to supplement teacher incomes. Poor parents can't. And that's frequently where we lose out. And then I think that we need to bring into play more strongly the international benchmarks like TIMSS, evaluate at every stage the teaching of maths and science and the learning ability of learners, and make an intervention if the numbers look wrong. You see, I hear about the G20, and South Africa is part of the G20. I've been part of it since establishment. The key, however, is that it's a G194 issue. It's not something that you can confine to richer countries and middle-income countries. It must extend across the globe, and we have to get this right. We don't have a second chance. And so we must go, you know, I don't think it's big change issues. It's finding the right methodology and making the appropriate interventions.
Yeah, John, please.
You know, I'm going to add one thing. I think we're at a point where we're in a little bit of danger of designing an education system for ourselves and our generation. We were brought up with the concept of a PC, a broadband capability. My children, who are in their late 20s, multitask at 3 to 4 different activities at the same time. So to educate them, the proper way would have been a teacher could be physically or virtually there, a teaching assistant is answering their questions, which they're texting in, students are answering the questions back and forth, they're collaborative learning. Now that sounds like perhaps where we should go, but I'm going to challenge you further. That's for my kids. The kids that are 10 to 12 to 14 years old do 7 to 8 tasks at the same time. So when we design the education system for the future, we've got to take innovation and skip a generation. And don't let somebody who doesn't understand that, including myself, design the interfaces. We need to really get a group together that can bring this new creativity to life.
John, a quick question. When you're looking at these remarkable innovations that allow people connecting over distances, they can learn from remote locations, how do you build in the need, especially in the developed world where it's easy for kids to sit in front of computers and do everything? How do you build in the development of social skills, the interaction in the playground, the interaction between peer-to-peer interaction that's necessary for full development?
Well, if you watch how everything from public relations to the media of the future will be, actually their peers help to police the groups. They develop communities of interest, they reinforce the proper behavior, etc. That doesn't mean we don't have to help them teach it. But I think you will find that the way the companies are run in the future will be social groups working together where they largely encourage themselves and have processes in place. We've got to create the environment for it. I think the same thing will happen in schools. Terry, if you give kids a system, they will figure it out themselves. If you allow them to interact, they'll go naturally where this future is. They already understand it from gaming.
I'd also like to if I could just add that the fact that our kids are exposed to so much technology and they're exposed to so much online presents us with challenges with our children that our parents didn't have to face with us. and really emphasizes the importance of teaching ethics in schools and really building a strong foundation of values for our young kids, because there's only so much we could do as parents in policing our kids when they're on the computer. You don't know what they're exposed to. So that really brings into play the importance of teaching work ethic, of teaching tolerance, etc. Again, our communities now as well have changed from many decades because of immigration. We have such diverse communities. How do you get the social harmony without teaching children about cross-cultural dialogue, tolerance, compassion, respecting our differences? All these things are new things that, well, they're not new things, but they're more important now than they were a couple of generations ago.
Just got a few minutes left. I'll try and get to...
Reece, one comment, going back on what John was saying. The technical capability today has outpaced the current generation of capabilities in terms of teachers and that part. And the notion of skip a generation is a very powerful one. And one of the things that we have to think about in the here and now is how do we help cope and deal with folks that way. In the business world, we do professional training all the time. And it is constant learning, constant growth and the like. With teachers in particular, we give them a certain set of skills. We put them into the marketplace, and the teacher training and ongoing growth and development and learning is slowed down. And so we've got to figure out, because the kids have got it. They're going to learn it. And you don't have to give them a lot of instruction. They'll adapt. And so how do you get a very active youth, to interface with somebody that's used to teaching a different way? And that goes from elite universities all the way down to primary grades.
Thanks for your patience. We'll try and get to all the hands that went up. We don't have a lot of time, but Ruben, I think it is, please.
Ruben Vardanyan from Russia. I'm the investment banker, but my three generation, my grandfather, and my father was the professors. And I think I echoed what Her Majesty said about the prestige and role model. I want to come back to the discussion about the point of I think it's key, the role model of the teacher who giving us not only knowledge, but also values and example of the behavior. How you can see the quality and quantity process was going now, where is role model of the teacher going down and prestige going down, and moral respect to their teacher, which was before huge, and everybody in the village was respecting the teacher, number one or number two person. It's never been very well paid. Teachers was always been not very well paid, but when respected in society, not anymore. How you can keep the prestige of teacher in our society, where we are not in the show business, we are not in the sportsmen, we are not the business people, and we're not here in the World Economic Forum. You can see the elite is not include the teachers like part of the key element of society success.
That's actually a very interesting point that's been raised in this forum about the need for teachers to get respect and have their status. It'll actually be that gentleman next. Irina Bokova, if I could ask you to touch on that, could there be something done as part of the Education for All campaign or part of the education system improvement that allows for a better promotion of teachers and their standing in society? Even if their pay scales are not going to be raised to higher levels, at least their position and the respect they deserve is built into the system.
Well, I think that the fact that we have this debate here also about the role of teacher is extremely important. It brings the message to business leaders, to political leaders. We have launched last year this Global Teachers Initiative. We have to know that in order to achieve the Millennium Development Goals of having primary education for everybody until 2015, we will need all over the world 10 million teachers. It's an extremely impressive figure, and we have to think of how we train them, how we teach them, how we finance education. I think it's intimately linked to the question of financing of education. That's why I think that G20 has to take up this issue. Her Majesty Queen Rania mentioned that we will need $16 billion every year until 2015 if we want to reach this figure. And then, of course, is the overall question of all different kinds of partnerships and cooperation. I think for that matter, South-South cooperation also can play an extremely important role. We have at UNESCO a South-South Cooperation Fund for Education. We are trying to promote this cause. There is a lot of potential of having good examples for that matter, but it's a huge challenge for all leaders.
So you're waiting patiently. Will you be in English or?
English, okay.
English, okay. Thank you.
Today we are talking about quality education, but as a parent and some of yourself who has young children might have the same experience, I think. That is, high quality education easily give away when low quality content coming through internet. You know, how much the children are addicted to the games and online. And I had trouble with this because I have my children and I'm running one of private equity firm which heavily invests in the game myself. So
it's coming back to haunt you.
Yeah. So what I did last year, I had the summer camp for gifted children in which I organized the contest for the children to come up with games, online games, in which they contest each other on the issue of the climate change. That's a very complicated issue for the primary school kids. But I was amazed how good the quality was when actually they end up producing. And the government recognized the effectiveness, so Korean government has decided to bring this issue to the education program. And I myself not only involved in this content industry as a businessman, but I'm also the chairman of Content Korea, which is a task force to formulate the policy for the Korean content industry. So I could introduce this game idea to our education system. So from my experience, I like to strongly recommend that you take a look at this possibility of bringing games.
Games, okay.
Yeah.
That's true, actually. John, a quick comment on that. I mean, the video game industry is bigger than Hollywood now. It's a vehicle which kids totally are embracing, and it's a primary source in many ways for them to learn new skills. Can that kind of environment be used in a positive way? Not where parents, of course, are worried that they're just going to sit there and just play games without learning anything.
Well, the answer is absolutely yes. And secondly, our kids expect us to do it. But if I could, Her Majesty probably would be too modest to say this, so I'm going to say it. Jordan did it right. Queen Rania, King Abdullah outlined a vision for the country. They wired their country. They began to teach the basic skills, change the role of teachers. They encouraged business to come in and play a key role here, NGOs to do it. They started local groups, and Rhonda IUB's Rubicon is an example, developed games in Arabic for math and science, trained the students. We began to locate jobs there. And they brought all these groups together. So, I'm going to kind of challenge this. I think these public-private partnerships not only work, they work well, but it's got to be a complex algebraic equation with somebody owning it and then getting each group to play at that level. Is that a fair statement?
Absolutely.
Your Majesty?
And thanks to your input as well, you're referring to the Jordan Education Initiative, which was born out of WEF and which brought the private sector from inside of Jordan, outside of Jordan, companies such as Cisco, to work in partnership with the Jordanian government. We've started 100 discovery schools, and we've been using a lot of the new technology, new materials, and testing it in those schools. So those kinds of innovative partnerships really go a long way. Another one is Madras City, which is a program that I started 2 years ago. Now, if you told me before 2 years that any entity other than the Ministry of Education is going to be involved in our public schools, I would have said no way, because that was only the domain of the government. But then what we did is that we identified the worst-run public schools, and we got members from the private sector to come and help us fix those schools, and members from the NGO community. So we have 70 partners now. We fixed 200 schools. And what's really been amazing for me to see is the synergy that has arisen, the fact that the communities feel so empowered. Whenever I go to those schools, I always get the sense of this, there's a buzz of productivity and prosperity, a sense of purpose. And I really do believe from this experience that we really need to, somebody in the audience was mentioning that we need to break that mold, that it's not just the government. And once that mold is broken, that opens up a whole load of possibilities for us to really perfect the educational...
I'd like a quick final thought from you, Your Majesty, on something that I know you're very, very passionate about, that education can change, for example, the Middle East region, which has its troubles, which has its issues, from resources through to political conflicts. Yeah. How can education change?
Yeah, if we just get away from the technical a little bit and just go back to the human side, why am I passionate about education? For me, it's about justice. And John, you say this all the time, that it's the great equalizer. You know, all of us are born with advantages and disadvantages. You might have a rich dad, somebody else might, you know, be extremely good looking, whatever. You know, education is one way to really mute the disparities between people, to really give people the chance to make the most of the opportunities that are presented to them, and to create opportunities. You know, I've heard it said that the saddest thing is not death, but the saddest thing is when your dreams die while you're alive. And I think that that's what happens when you're illiterate. You know, you don't have a chance, you get trapped. When I look at my region, the Middle East, I feel that education can really be the balm that can soothe a lot of the social ailments that plague our region. If you look at our demographics, 60% of our population is under the age of 25. So, and that said, we have one of the highest unemployment rates in the world. 1 out of 4 of these young kids don't have a job. So they are, I call them a generation in waiting, because they're stuck in this transition between schools and the workplace. And part of the reason is that the educational system has failed them. It hasn't given them the skills to get a job. And that, in spite of the fact that over the last 10 years, we've had one of the fastest, very fast rate of economic growth, but that hasn't reflected on job creation. So what's going to happen to these young people? You know, they have an irrelevant education. They're frustrated. That's what, you know, can lead to radicalization, extremism. The converse is also great. If you look, if we're able to create jobs for these young kids, then you could really see a tsunami change in the region. That demographic bulge can be a major change in outlook, in mindsets, in thought process that can really transform our region. If you look at Palestine, there are 108,000 Palestinian kids that don't go to school today. That's up from 4,000 10 years ago. These kids are growing up under the shadow of an occupation. They're scarred by conflict. They see no hope, no future. How can we expect for there to be any sense of normality without an education? You know, and I personally have given up on the politicians of this generation on both sides of this conflict. And I feel that the future is with the younger generation. And, you know, the fact that we need to try to erase the prejudices and the deeply entrenched hatreds. And that can only happen through a quality education. Look at Iraq. 2 million kids don't go to school in Iraq. Their daily lessons are in violence, in hunger. How is Iraq going to move forward without getting those children to school? And finally, women. You know, now in different Arab countries, women have achieved different levels of progress in the economic and social fields and political fields. But there is it's all a variation. Their situation is a variation of a common theme, and that is gender injustice. You know, and it's only through getting our girls into school, making sure that they reap the benefits of their education by being in the workplace, by having curricula that addresses some of the stereotypes against girls. That's when we can really try to change mindsets. So in a region that's now very much associated with extremism, I think it could be a region associated with hope. And the only way to achieve that is through a quality education.
Thank you. Well, as always, we have so many issues, and so many fantastic issues have been raised that need more discussion. I hope it's something that doesn't stop here and does carry on. We never have enough time in these kind of sessions to touch on everything and to expand on everything, and I apologize for those of you who had your hands up and we couldn't get to your questions. It's important, though, that education is now being so seriously taken. You know, we're reading the signs, so to speak, and I always say it's important to read the signs correctly. In Virginia, where I'm based, in Washington, D.C. area, a state trooper, a policeman, drove onto Route 10, onto the freeway, and saw this car driving very, very slowly. And he was like, this is more dangerous than someone speeding, so he was a bit worried. He pulled the car over, and it was filled with very elderly ladies. And he walked up to the driver, this old woman sitting there at the wheel, and he noticed the passengers' ghostly pale faces. They were terrified, you know. And he said to the driver, he said, what are you doing? She said, officer, I'm just driving at the speed limit. He said, what do you mean driving at the speed limit? You're going so slowly. She said, no, it said 10. I'm driving at 10 miles an hour. He said, no, 10 is the name of the road. It's not. She said, I saw the sign 10. He said, no, that's not the speed limit. It's Route 10. You're on Route 10. That's the name of the road. So she was embarrassed and said, I'm sorry. He said, I'm just going to give you a warning this time. But before I let you go, I have to ask you, why are your passengers? They look terrified. What's happened? She said, they'll be all right in a moment. They just got off Route 120. So, important to read the signs properly. Please, a big warm thanks to our panel for raising so many key issues.